Thank you, Dave, and I apologies in advance for, you're going to hear my voice for a little while here. I think Todd Wills referred to it as a fielder filibuster. I prefer to think of it as a lecture. Either way, we'll try to cover a number of different topics. And this first presentation really is just a brief overview. Now, the State of the Lake report is organized sometimes around certain species groups or families, then other times around certain habitat types. And so this is really specific to the nearshore fish communities, and these are the authors and the co-authors for that particular chapter, but there's many different people that contribute to this information. And then the subsequent talks after this one will drill down into some of the specific species and communities that we're interested in. So the nearshore fish habitat for Lake Huron might be defined as the 30-meter bathymetry inside of that. That's what is used and reported in a number of different pieces of literature as a definition of the nearshore habitat. And in doing so, that encompasses about 18,000 square kilometers of Lake Huron. So it's really a huge area, and it is about 31% of the lake area total. So the nearshore area is more productive, typically with higher levels of nutrients and chlorophyll compared to, say, the main basin. It's warmer. It often constitutes the spawning and nursery habitat for many of our Lake Huron species, including some of the offshore species. It includes embayments, drowned river mouths, archipelagos, and the connecting channels. There is often a greater diversity of fish and aquatic life in the nearshore area, and it's where a lot of the harvest takes place too. So it's really important. And then these are some of the fish species or families that we have specific fish community objectives worked out for. And I will be touching on each of these, and then, like I said, we have presentations that will get into some of them more specifically. This is the trend in yield over time for walleye, and the fish community objective is to have populations capable of sustaining a harvest of 0.7 million kilograms. So you can see where that is, and that's derived mainly as sort of an average of the pre-collapse yield from the commercial fisheries until the collapse in the middle part of the 20th century. And the yield information we have today is probably conservative, because we know that we don't have fully represented the recreational harvest from the Ontario waters. So the actual values are a little bit higher than that. But we have made a lot of progress. And if we look specifically at Saginaw Bay, because that's the single largest source of walleye within Lake Huron, we can see that we're starting to get pretty close to that pre-collapsed average there. And I'll elaborate a little bit more about this in my Saginaw Bay topic. In the case of yellow perch, that population lake-wide, or collection of populations, has not been performing relative to where it has been, sometimes as recently as the 80s or the 90s. I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Saginaw Bay, and I think Aronis is going to touch on maybe that as well with some of his walleye talk for the Ontario waters. But generally, even if we were to have the estimates of the recreational harvest from Ontario, it would probably couldn't begin to make up that difference. So we're still below the fish community objective for yellow perch. Lake sturgeon, there isn't a specific harvest or yield objective, but rather to see it removed from the threatened list for the United States, and to maintain and rehabilitate populations in the Canadian waters. Well, it's still threatened today, unfortunately. There are recovery strategies in place for both Michigan and Ontario, and there are some populations that are increasing. There are some populations that are numbering, we believe, in the hundreds of fish, which is a good sign. But we still are enduring a lot of spawning barriers, such as dams. That remains a major obstacle throughout the watershed. Stocking continues and has been expanded most recently in Michigan to the Saginaw River system. And Justin Chiat is going to be talking about sturgeon here later on, and he will elaborate on a lot of these and have more information. The sausage is to maintain northern pike as a prominent predator throughout its natural range, and to maintain muskellunge in numbers and sizes that will safeguard and enhance the species status. And there is a 0.1 million kilogram sort of target for this fish community objective. We don't have good overall harvest estimates for where we stand relative to that. Northern pike are very abundant throughout much of the nearshore waters of the lake, and probably have been increasing since 2014, when we've had the higher water levels, which they benefit from for spawning purposes. Muskie are a little more common probably in the Ontario waters, or at least they're a little better assessed there. They're still fairly rare in the Michigan waters. For centrorchids, to sustain smallmouth and largemouth bass and remaining assemblage of sunfishes at recreationally attractive levels. Smallmouth are common and relatively abundant throughout much of Lake Huron, and likely are a beneficiary of round goby invasion in terms of as a dietary item. We know a little less about largemouth bass. They often occur outside our assessment areas and depths and aren't well quantified by the gears we use, but they're certainly there. Certain places and times, rock bass and other sunfishes can be locally abundant. And the centrorchids are probably one of the beneficiaries of unabated climate change. So if that is allowed to continue, then we might expect an even more prominent role of centrorchids in the future. Channel catfish is a prominent predator throughout its range. We are probably pretty well short of that FCO 0.2 million kilograms, although they're widely distributed throughout the warm water reaches and they're abundant in Saginaw Bay. A lot of our commercial yield there has declined and is being sustained at around 42,000 kilograms, so pretty short of what probably lake-wide would be that 0.2 million kilograms. The decline in the commercial fisheries, we believe, traces back to some of the restrictions due to disease transport precautions, because a lot of those fisheries are actually live catch-out transfers of channel catfish to other catch-out ponds in different places in other states. And then channel catfish are probably also another potential beneficiary from climate change if left unabated. They will probably become only more prominent in the fish communities. So we have some recommendations worked out for the Nearshore chapter in the State of the Lake report, and that is the importance of restoration of connectivity. So many of these species depend on tributary access for spawning purposes, and so that means meaningful dam removal is really important. Decision making for offshore waters will potentially affect nearshore fish communities, and vice versa for that matter. And although we sometimes tend to think about those as distinct separate areas, really management needs to be holistic when they reflect on that and make plans. Nearshore habitats will probably be those that are most affected by climate change, assuming that will continue, and managers should begin to help stakeholders adjust their objectives and their perspectives as species dominance is going to change, and we'll have winners and losers amongst the nearshore fish community. Cormorants, if they are allowed to return to their pre-control abundance, will undoubtedly have a lot of effect on our nearshore fish communities, and will require allocation, if you will, to their predation of sport, commercial, and prey fish species. Cormorants, of course, are the ability to manage them through control efforts was suspended as a result of litigation recently, and so there's a lot of work going on along that front for free-swimming fishes, but as of right now, there's still no specific permitting available to benefit fishes. And then lastly, lake sturgeon stocking and juvenile indexing efforts need to be continued and expanded, and again, I think Justin's going to talk about that. So that's kind of the nearshore fish community in a nutshell. And then